Hi everyone, my name is Shana and I'm a third year Singapore Management University undergraduate. In today's video, I want to share with you about 4 books that helped me learn more about Singapore. And the 4 books are as follows. So firstly, we have Kuan Yew, The Man and His Ideas, and this is sort of like an autobiography of Kuan Yew. It's really inspirational for me because it talks about Kuan Yew, who is like our founding father, and it's in the context of Singapore's history. So no Singaporean history would be complete without him, and really understanding his life from when he studied law in Cambridge and how a lot of his early experiences formed his ideas would help you understand why a lot of the policies in Singapore are very hard-headed. So for example, when he went to Cambridge to study, he saw a lot of these European states and how these welfare states were run, and he thought that this was unsustainable if Singapore were to adopt it, which is why Singapore adopts a very different policy of having like each individual to earn his own money, and then your money goes into CPF. The state does not just give you funds so freely. And to me, I actually thought that it was more of like an inspirational book rather than an educational one. So a lot of these Singapore history, like race riots, are things that we studied in primary, secondary school in social studies, like ethnic integration policy. But reading this really helped me to understand where these policies actually came from, and also just to understand Lee Kuan Yew's drive to want to sacrifice so much for his for his country, and to eventually be a politician. So I think it was the drive that really resonated the best with me, and this was a book, one of the first books that I picked up when circuit breaker first hit. Whenever Singapore goes through some challenges, I will always think, what would Lee Kuan Yew do? And I also try to apply his hard-headedness and hardworking drive to my own life. So what I really liked about the book were the direct quotes from Lee Kuan Yew, because it was just so candid and was really the essence of his entire personality and was translated into the policies that he implemented in Singapore. So one of the quote was, "You're talking about Rwanda or Bangladesh or Cambodia or the Philippines. They've got democracy, but have you got a civilized life to lead? People want economic development first and foremost. The leaders may talk something else. You take a poll on any people. What is it they want? The right to write an editorial as you like. They want homes, medicines, jobs, schools." And another quote within the same vein is, "The ideas of individual supremacy and the right of free expression, when carried to excess, have not worked. They have made it difficult to keep American society cohesive, causing widespread crime and violence, and then the media attacks the integrity and character of your leaders with impunity." So these are definitely very controversial quotes, especially if you're someone who is a lot more progressive and you want to fight for the freedom of the press. I think that it's important to look at the quotes in the context of when these quotes were said. So these were when Singapore was first founded, and therefore having the focus on economic development was definitely necessary. But of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Okay, so the next book is Singapore is Not an Island by Bilahari Kausukan. And Bilahari was in the MFA for 32 years, so he's very experienced with how Singapore practices its diplomacy approach towards other countries and also in organizations like ASEAN. So he's a realist, and that means that his overall worldview of countries is that states are the main actors and the whole world is like at peace because it's at equilibrium. So back in the Cold War days, there's the idea that the world was at peace because of the balance of power between the US and the Soviet Union. And then currently, some people argue that the balance of power is now being held by both between the US and China. And then, of course, there are like other allies as well. So it's very interesting because he talks about how we should practice this realist approach when we bring it into our diplomacy with other countries and within ASEAN. And importantly, we need to stand our ground when other larger ASEAN countries kind of bully us. And you can read it all in the book. He's very unfiltered, so he says a lot of issues that I guess maybe when other countries read it, they might feel that it's a bit offensive, but I think it's okay. I mean, it's just his personality. So actually I got this book because I attended one of his talks in NUS. In my first year, I was very interested in like policy stuff, so I wanted to attend a lot of these talks, and this was hosted by the NUS Political Association, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, they invited him to do a talk about geopolitics, and I was very attracted to his like charismatic personality and how he was very unfiltered. So I bought this book at Kino right before circuit breaker, just so I could spend some time to read it. And I also read it when I was doing my world politics class, where we discussed about the different school of thoughts with regards to diplomacy. So there's realism, liberalism, and constructivism. And at that point of time, I was very in between the realist and liberalist point of view, because the liberalist point of view believes that international organizations like the UN, EU, ASEAN has a lot of impact, and the realist point of view believes that like hard power precedes soft power. So I was believing kind of like in a mix between the two of them, because he actually has like real life work experience in MFA. I think he would know a lot better. And then he says that we should see the world as it is and not what we want it to be or what it should be. So one of the more popular quotes from this book is, "Diplomacy is not about being nice, polite, or agreeable. It's more fundamentally about protecting and promoting the country's interests, preferably by being nice, but if necessary, by other appropriate means." So this is really like the essence of his entire belief in the realist school of thought, and how he has used this to promote Singapore's interests when he was the ambassador. And also he believes that there's no such thing as natural rights, so this really helped to shape my views. The fact is, all rights evolve according to specific circumstances and within the context of particular cultures, beliefs, values, and changing historical context. The idea that human rights have an autonomous reality or are somehow natural rights, as Jeremy Bentham said, rhetorical nonsense, nonsense upon stilts. So this whole debate between, I've touched on it in legal theory and in ethics and social responsibility in school, and I think I'm always very in between these two, because both provide very compelling arguments. But when you read his arguments, he says it in a way that it makes it so obvious that positivist law is like the correct school of thought. So I would really encourage everyone to read it. Okay, so the next one is very popular. I think most people have read it before. It's This is What Inequality Looks Like by Yu Tan, and I found out that she's an NTU professor of sociology, because when I posted a review of the book on my Insta story, then my friend from NTU studying sociology replied me. So that's quite interesting. I think in my second year, I dabbled a bit with the idea of being a sociologist, because I think it's very interesting to understand how people live, and I thought that it provided a lot of insights into policy making, because if you understand how the lower income actually live, understand their point of view, it will be much easier for you to come up with effective policies, rather than if you're just in a room and like coming up with these policies and you don't actually understand why they are not using it. So one of the main arguments that she proposes is that because a lot of these social policies require a lot of like form filling, and it's very difficult for these lower income families in Singapore to get the help that they need, because they don't know how to fill the forms, or they need to head down, need to submit a lot of documents and meet a lot of requirements that they're just not able to do so. And she also argues that their social environment plays a huge part. So sociology believes that your environment plays a large role in the way you make decisions and the way you turn out. A lot of these lower income families live in one-room rental flats in Singapore, and on their lifts you can see like pictures of like don't do drugs, or don't join a gang. So these images actually sort of perpetuate this kind of environment, because imagine if you're a young child who is born to a lower income family and you always see these images, it kind of affects the way you grow up. A lot of Singaporeans are very blind to these like lower income families. So it's very interesting because the book cover it says this is what inequality looks like, but inequality is blurred out, so a lot of Singaporeans don't see this, and they lead very different lives. Like, for example, on the weekend I go to town, I've never really visited those one-room rental flats before. I think her argument was very interesting. So one of the quotes she said was, "Inequality, in fact, is a logical outcome of meritocracy. What the education system does when it selects, sorts, and hierarchies, and when it gives its stamp of approval to those at the top, is that it renders those who succeed through the system as legitimately deserving. Left implicit is that those at the bottom have failed to be deserving." So I think I definitely did feel this statement very strongly as a young child, because we're always taught that, as long as we work hard, because Singapore has a meritocratic system, then we will rise to the top. But as someone from a lower income household, it's very difficult to expect the same for them, because their social environment is difficult. They don't have the resources that they need for like tuition or parental support as much as the more privileged kids do. And I think the meritocratic system sometimes makes us a bit unempathetic to these problems, because we think that we worked hard to get where we are and we don't consider the social environment that much. So reading this book was definitely like a wake-up call to be more aware of these issues happening in Singapore, and also not to have such an entitled and privileged mindset, which I'm definitely a victim. So the last book is actually a series, and it's like the extreme opposite of this is what inequality looks like, because it discusses the rich people in Singapore. And I think you already know what I'm talking about. It's Crazy Rich Asians. So I read this book in early 2018, and I was like, because I haven't read it before, and it was like so good. Like, it's like satire that isn't too like bitter. Like, sometimes whenever I read articles or books by people who are very snarky, I feel like they are too jaded at the world, and it's not very pleasant to read, because I like to read people who have like a more uplifting spirit in their writing, like more encouraging. So I think Kevin Kwan writes this in a very comical, satirical way. If you haven't read the book, you should really do so, because it's a lot more subtle and nuanced in the way that they discuss the issues. And also the first book is like, you would think that it's good, but then when you read the second and third book, you realize that it's so much better. So in the first book, it talks about Nick and Rachel Chu's marriage, which is like, okay, I mean, there's a bit of roadblocks here and there. But for the second and third one, it talks about Kitty Pong and about like the new rich. So they call like people who have like inherited money from their grandparents, they call them old money. But then people like Kitty Pong, who are not like so cultured, and then she's known for being very like scandalous, but then because she married in, so she's like the new rich. And there's like this whole conflict between like old money and new money, because the people from old money think that the new money people are not like that cultured. And there's also the relationship between Astrid and Charlie. So that was like her high school sweetheart, and then in the end, like, her parents didn't really approve of them, so they eloped, and that was really fun, because you're able to see all the family drama come together and affect not only Nick and Rachel, but also like their cousins. And there was one quote that said about how like Chinese parents sometimes expect their kids to marry like people who are like up there on the social ladder, and it's just a very good and relevant commentary, especially if you live in Singapore and have these type of parents. And like the third book is called Rich People Problems, and I think it really accurately represents all the issues that I hear about from like my rich friends and dramas that I watch. It's a very accurate representation, and I think that from the series you can really learn about the culture in Singapore, and especially with respect to the rich people, but also in general, because they do talk about like local food and local places in Singapore. That's the end of my video. Thank you for watching. If you like it, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and let me know what you want to watch for the next video. Thank you.